On June 11, 1962, 3 inmates vanished from Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. They left behind a clever escape plan: dummies in their beds, holes in cell walls, and a makeshift raft. Despite decades of investigation, their fate remains officially unknown. This is the documented story of the Alcatraz escape. Alcatraz. The island prison Alcatraz is a rocky island located in the middle of San Francisco Bay. It sits about 1.5 miles offshore, surrounded by cold water and strong currents. From the city, the island looks small, but for decades it carried a reputation much larger than its size. Originally, Alcatraz was used as a military fort in the mid-1800s. Later, the U.S. Army built a military prison there. In 1934, during the Great Depression, the island was converted into a maximum security federal penitentiary. The government wanted a place to hold the most dangerous and escape-prone prisoners in the country. The location was chosen for a reason. The waters around the island average 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. It's cold enough to cause hypothermia within minutes. The tides are strong, pushing toward the Golden Gate or back into the bay, making swimming extremely difficult. For decades, authorities claimed that no one could escape alive. Alcatraz was designed for strict control. The prison had 4 main cell blocks: watchtowers, armed guards, and regular patrols. Every inmate had his own cell, measuring only about 5 by 9 feet. Daily life followed a rigid schedule: roll calls, meals, work assignments, and lights out. Talking in the cell house was restricted. Discipline was severe, but conditions were considered clean and orderly compared to other prisons of the era. Prisoners at Alcatraz included some of the most notorious criminals of the 20th century. Al Capone, George Machine Gun Kelly, and Robert Stroud, known as the Birdman of Alcatraz, all spent time there. The prison held around 250 to 275 men at a time, never more than about 300, though it was built for 336 cells. Escapes were considered nearly impossible. Over the years, more than 30 men tried. Officially, all were either caught, shot, or confirmed drowned. The few who made it into the water were never proven to have survived. This track record helped build the myth that Alcatraz was escape-proof. By the early 1960s, the prison was aging. Salt air corroded steel, and the costs of operating the facility were far higher than mainland prisons. Still, it remained in full operation, housing inmates considered too dangerous or disruptive to be held elsewhere. In 1962, the island prison had been running for nearly 30 years. Its guards were experienced and its systems were trusted. Yet inside those walls, a group of inmates was quietly working on a plan. Their goal was to do what the government said was impossible: escape from Alcatraz. The escapees, Morris and the Anglin brothers, the men behind the 1962 escape, were Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin. Frank Lee Morris, was born in Washington, D.C. In 1926, he lost his parents at a young age and spent much of his childhood in foster care. By his teenage years, he was already in trouble with the law. His early crimes included burglary and narcotics possession. Morris was considered highly intelligent. Prison records show that he scored in the top 2% on IQ tests. But he also had a history of escape attempts. At the age of 20, he escaped from the Louisiana State Penitentiary, known as Angola. He was caught after a year, but the attempt showed both patience and planning. Later, Morris committed bank robbery and other offenses. By the late 1950s, he was serving a 14-year sentence at the federal penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia. After another escape attempt there, authorities decided he was too dangerous to be held on the mainland. In 1960, he was transferred to Alcatraz. John and Clarence Anglin, John William Anglin, was born in Georgia in 1930. His younger brother, Clarence, was born in 1931. The Anglin family were seasonal farm workers, moving around the country for crops. The brothers grew up close, often working together. As young men, John and Clarence became involved in crime. Their specialty was bank robbery. They were usually armed, but records say they avoided violence when possible. In 1958, they were arrested in Alabama after a robbery and sentenced to long prison terms. Like Maurice, the Anglin brothers tried to escape from other prisons. After repeated attempts, both were sent to Alcatraz in 1961. John arrived first, followed by Clarence a few months later. Shared traits by 1962. Maurice and the Anglins were all in adjacent cells in Block B. They got to know each other and began to build trust. All three men had reputations as problem inmates. They were intelligent, resourceful, and unwilling to serve time quietly. Each had experience with tools and work assignments inside the prison. More importantly, each had already tried escaping before. Their placement near each other made communication possible. The prison routine allowed limited talking during meals, recreation, and work shifts. From these small windows, a plan began to form. Alan West, another man, Alan West, was also part of the group. Born in 1929, West had been involved in car theft and robbery. He had escaped from a Florida prison and later was caught and sent to Alcatraz in 1957. He was housed in a cell close to Maurice and the Anglins. West contributed to the planning stages, especially with collecting materials. But on the night of the escape, he was unable to leave his cell. His vent was not fully cleared, and he was forced to stay behind. Why they stood out? Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were not the most famous criminals at Alcatraz. They were not mobsters or killers, but they had the combination of intelligence, patience, and determination needed to attempt the impossible. Prison staff considered them disciplined, but not openly disruptive. They kept their behavior within limits, which allowed them to avoid suspicion. This made it possible for them to carry out months of secret preparation without drawing attention. By mid-1962, Maurice, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, and Alan West had put together the foundations of an escape plan. Theirs would become the most famous attempt in the prison's history. Planning the escape plan began in December 1961. Frank Morris was the leader. But the Anglin brothers and Alan West worked alongside him. Their goal was simple: to get out of their cells, reach the roof, and find a way off the island. Tools and materials they had almost nothing at first. Over time, they collected what they needed from prison workshops, jobs, and scavenging. Spoons and forks were sharpened into digging tools. A broken vacuum cleaner motor was converted into a drill. Pieces of wood, soap, toothpaste, and paint were saved for disguises. More than 50 raincoats were stolen or borrowed from the clothing shop. These would later become life vests and a raft. Everything had to be hidden. The men built secret storage areas behind their cell walls. They also tucked items into the utility corridor that ran behind the cells. Guards rarely checked these spaces. Digging the holes, each man's cell had a small ventilation grill near the back wall. Using spoons, pieces of metal, and the drill, they slowly chipped away at the concrete around the vents. The work was loud, so they timed it carefully. They used prison-issued instruments like accordions to cover the noise. Sometimes they worked during music hour when other prisoners played in the block. Dust and chunks of concrete were hidden inside pockets or flushed away. Cardboard and paint were used to make fake grills. From a distance, guards could not tell the vents had been tampered with. Creating the dummies to fool guards during night head counts, the men made dummy heads. These were built from a mix of soap, toothpaste, cement dust, and toilet paper. The skin tone was painted with materials from the prison workshop. Barbers inside the prison gave them real human hair, which they glued onto the heads. At night, they placed the dummies on their pillows and tucked blankets to look like sleeping bodies. The raft and vests, the most ambitious part, was building flotation devices. Using more than 50 raincoats, they stitched and glued together life vests. The raft was built by overlapping coats and sealing them with heat from prison pipes. The raft design came from magazines in the prison library. One article from Popular Mechanics described how to make a pontoon raft. The escapees adapted this idea with the materials available. Hidden workshop behind the cells, through the widened vents, was a utility corridor. This space gave access to pipes and maintenance shafts. The escapees used this hidden area as a workshop. Here they assembled the raft, stored tools, and prepared supplies. They even built a makeshift drill from the vacuum motor, using it to loosen rivets on the vent covers. The workshop was dangerous. Guards patrolled above and below, but the narrow passage provided just enough privacy. Alan West's role: Alan West contributed by helping gather materials and plan the escape. He also stored parts of the raft in his cell, but his digging progressed more slowly. He had trouble removing the grill, which would prove critical on the escape night. Timing the plan, the group worked for 6 months. They waited for summer when the weather and tides were less severe. They studied guard schedules and counted steps between patrols. Every detail was considered. By June 1962, the holes were complete. The dummies were ready. The raft was hidden behind the cell block. The plan was in place. It was a careful, methodical effort. Piece by piece, tool by tool, the inmates built a way out of what was called an escape-proof prison. The night of June 11, 1962, the escape took place on the night of June 11, 1962. For months, the plan had been building. That evening, the inmates carried it out, preparing the cells. As lights went out, each man placed a dummy head on his pillow. The heads looked realistic, with skin-colored paint and real hair from the prison barbershop. Blankets were pulled high to complete the illusion. From the guard's view, the men appeared to be sleeping. Escaping the cells, Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin crawled through the holes behind their ventilation grills. These openings were just wide enough for their bodies. They had been slowly dug out over half a year. Once inside the utility corridor, they could move upward through a service shaft. Alan West, however, ran into trouble. His vent was still partly stuck. He tried to chip away more concrete, but it was too late. He could not free himself. West was forced to remain in his cell as the others went ahead. Moving through the utility corridor, the men climbed pipes and service passages inside the wall. They reached the top of the cell block and made their way to the roof area. This route had been tested before. Over several nights, they had slipped into the corridor to practice moving around unseen. Noise was a danger. Guards were stationed above and below. But the inmates worked slowly, using the night's silence and timing their movements carefully. Crossing the roof. Once on the roof, the men crawled quietly across the prison's top. The distance was risky. Watchtowers surrounded the yard. Guards with rifles patrolled the area. But it was dark, and the men stayed low. They climbed down a kitchen vent pipe to the ground. From there, they made their way through blind spots in the yard, toward the shoreline. Reaching the shore at the water's edge, they retrieved the raft and life vests. These had been hidden in the utility corridor and carried down with them. The raft was folded but bulky, inflated it using a homemade accordion-style pump built from scrap wood. The tide was moving outward toward the Golden Gate. The water was about 50 degrees, enough to cause hypothermia within an hour. The raft was their only chance. Len West left behind. Meanwhile, Alan West stayed in his cell. In later interviews, he explained that he had been the one to suggest using raincoats for flotation. He helped build the raft, but on the critical night, he was unable to get through his vent. He later told investigators he tried until morning, but failed, guards unaware. Throughout the night, guards made routine checks. From the walkway, each bed appeared occupied. The dummy heads were convincing enough to pass inspection. No alarms were raised until morning roll call. Into the bay, sometime between 10 p.m. and midnight, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers pushed their raft into the water. They were last seen inside the prison. From that point, no one knows for certain what happened. Whether they paddled toward Angel Island, drifted under the Golden Gate, or were pulled out to sea, remains unknown. No bodies were ever recovered. The night of June 11th ended quietly at Alcatraz. Guards believed all inmates were in their cells. By morning, the truth would break the myth that the prison was escape-proof. Discovery of the escape on the morning of June 12, 1962, guards began their routine head count. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Each bed appeared occupied. But when officers tried to wake the men, they made a shocking discovery. The dummy heads in Frank Morris's cell, the guard tapped a figure under the blanket. The head rolled onto the floor. It was not a man, but a dummy made from plaster, soap, and toilet paper. The guard saw the painted face and human hair glued on top. In John and Clarence Anglin's cells, the same trick was found. The brothers had also placed dummy heads on their pillows.
Ow.
The alarm was raised. Within minutes, sirens sounded across the island. Guards searched every corner of the prison, the yard, and the shoreline. The cells were examined closely. Behind each rear vent, officers found holes leading into the utility corridor. The escape route was confirmed. Immediate response, the warden ordered a full lockdown. Helicopters flew over the island. Boats from the Coast Guard and local police began sweeping the bay. The search extended to Angel Island and the Marin shoreline. On the island itself, guards searched the rooftops, tunnels, and workshops. They found evidence left behind by the escapees. Among the items were tools, bits of plaster, and leftover materials from the raft. Discovery of belongings in the following days, search teams recovered fragments in the water. Near Angel Island, they found a life vest, pieces of rubber, and bits of a paddle. Later, plastic bags with personal belongings were discovered. Some contained photographs, letters, and addresses linked to the Anglin family. Investigators debated the meaning of these items. Did the men lose them while crossing the bay, or were they dropped intentionally as a distraction? Alan West's interrogation, meanwhile, Alan West was questioned by the FBI. He admitted he had been part of the escape plan but failed to get out of his cell. West described the digging, the raft construction, and the timeline. He confirmed that the plan had been in motion for months and gave investigators details about how the men disguised their work. According to West, the original goal was to reach Angel Island. From there, they intended to steal clothes and a boat, then head to the mainland. West's statements helped investigators reconstruct the escape step by step. The bay searched for weeks. The Coast Guard, San Francisco Police, and the FBI searched the waters. They looked for bodies, but none were recovered. The bay's currents were strong, pulling toward the Golden Gate and the Pacific Ocean. Experts noted that the water temperature was near 50 degrees, enough to cause exhaustion within an hour. Despite this, no conclusive evidence of drowning was found. The absence of bodies left investigators with an open question. Had the escapees died in the attempt, or had they made it to shore? Public reaction news of the escape spread quickly. Headlines across the country reported the impossible prison break. Alcatraz had long claimed to be escape-proof. Now 3 men had vanished, leaving behind only dummies and a raft. The story embarrassed federal authorities but also fascinated the public. The image of the plaster heads and the boldness of the plan captured national attention. Official position: the prison remained on lockdown for days. Security was tightened. Warden Olin Blackwell insisted the men had drowned. But the FBI investigation was just beginning. The search for answers would continue for years. The FBI investigation, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, opened its case the same day the escape was discovered, June 12, 1962. The San Francisco field office led the inquiry, working alongside the Coast Guard, local police, and prison staff. For 17 years, the FBI followed leads, tested evidence, and interviewed witnesses. Immediate evidence agents collected the dummy heads, vent covers, and digging tools. They photographed the holes in the cell walls and the hidden workshop in the utility corridor. The raft and life vests were reconstructed from descriptions given by Alan West. Fragments were also recovered from the bay. A life vest, parts of a paddle, and pieces of rubber were found floating near Angel Island. Later, investigators found plastic bags containing personal items of the Anglin brothers, including letters and photographs. The FBI sent these items to laboratories for testing. They confirmed the raft and vests were made from prison-issue raincoats, glued and stitched together. Oh, quality was crude but functional, Alan West's statement. Alan West became the FBI's main source of information. During interrogations, he explained how the men dug through their vents, built the raft, and created dummy heads. He admitted he was part of the plan, but failed to escape. West claimed the intention was to reach Angel Island, steal clothes and a boat, and then head to the mainland. He gave investigators a timeline of how the plan developed, starting in late 1961, tide and current studies. One of the FBI's main tasks was to determine if survival was possible. They worked with the Coast Guard in U.S. Weather Bureau to study tides and currents on the night of June 11th. Reports showed that the outgoing tide between 11 p.m. and midnight was extremely strong. The current flowed toward the Golden Gate Bridge and then out into the Pacific Ocean. Water temperatures were about 50 to 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Experts concluded that survival time without protection was around 30 to 45 minutes. Because of these conditions, the FBI believed the men likely drowned before reaching land. Searches of land and shore law enforcement searched Angel Island and the Marin County shoreline. Footprints were reported on Angel Island, but no confirmed trace of the escapees was found. Dogs were used, but no trail was established. The Anglin brothers' family homes in Georgia and Florida were monitored. Relatives were interviewed, and mail was checked for years. No contact was confirmed. Possible sightings. In the weeks after the escape, Reports came in of men seen in San Francisco and Marin County matching the escapees' descriptions. Some claimed to have seen them stealing a car. Others said they spotted them in restaurants or bus stations. None of these sightings were verified. The FBI investigated all tips. Some came from as far as South America. Agents traveled and followed up, but every lead ended without proof. Official conclusion in 1964, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover approved the official position. The Bureau concluded that Morris and the Anglin brothers had drowned in the bay. Their reasoning was based on tides, water temperature, and the lack of confirmed sightings. The investigation continued, but by 1979, the FBI formally closed its case. The file was handed over to the U.S. Marshals Service, which still maintains the escapees as fugitives. U.S. Marshals Service role: the Marshals continue to treat the men as wanted. They explain that until evidence of death is proven, fugitives are never officially declared dead. This keeps the case open. As of today, the Marshals list Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin as missing escapees. The legacy of the FBI inquiry: the FBI spent 17 years investigating the Alcatraz escape. Their work created one of the most detailed prison escape case files in history. While they believed the men drowned, they admitted the possibility could not be ruled out entirely. The absence of bodies and the disappearance of 3 men from a supposedly escape-proof prison ensured the case would never fade from public interest. Alcatraz aftermath: the escape of June 1962 shook Alcatraz's reputation. For decades, the prison had been described as escape-proof. Now, 3 men had vanished without a trace. Even if they drowned, the fact that they had broken out of the prison walls was enough to damage its image. Media coverage. The story made national headlines. Newspapers ran photographs of the dummy heads, the vent holes, and the rafts made from raincoats. Reporters called it the most daring prison break in American history. Television news followed the search, showing Coast Guard boats combing the bay. The escape became front-page news, not only in California but across the country. Public perception. The public was fascinated. Some admired the cleverness of the plan, while others worried about dangerous criminals possibly living free. Families in the Bay Area were unsettled by the idea that inmates might have made it to shore. The mystery kept people talking for months. Inside the prison, at Alcatraz, security was tightened immediately. Guards increased cell inspections. Maintenance crews sealed weak points and reinforced grills. Extra patrols were ordered at night. The warden insisted that the escapees had drowned, but the embarrassment was clear. Prisoners who remained on the island saw the escape as proof that the system was not as perfect as it claimed. Some admired Morris and the Anglins for outsmarting the guards. Others feared punishment and avoided speaking about it. Federal response: the federal government defended the prison, but questions grew about its effectiveness and cost. Alcatraz was expensive to operate. Supplies and staff had to be ferried daily from the mainland. The salt air caused damage to buildings and infrastructure. The escape added to the pressure. Closure of Alcatraz: less than a year later, on March 21, 1963, Alcatraz was closed as a federal prison. Officials said the reasons were high operating costs and deteriorating facilities. But the escape was widely seen as a factor in the decision. The prison had lost its aura of being escape-proof. After the prison years after its closure, Alcatraz sat empty for a short time. In 1969, Native American activists occupied the island for 19 months, demanding that it be turned into a cultural center. Later in 1972, the island became part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area under the National Park Service. Today, Alcatraz is one of the most visited tourist attractions in San Francisco. Each year, more than 1 million people tour the cell blocks, the dining hall, and the yard. Guides tell the story of the 1962 escape as a centerpiece of the island's history. Lasting impact: the escape changed how people saw Alcatraz. Instead of being known only as a fortress of control, it became famous for mystery. The image of 3 men breaking through the walls, leaving dummies in their beds, and vanishing into the bay remains one of the most memorable events in American prison history. Later developments in public fascination: the 1962 escape from Alcatraz did not end with the initial search. Over the years, new claims, reports, and theories kept the story alive. The absence of bodies and the mystery of what happened after the men left the island gave the case a long life in public imagination. Film and books in 1979, the movie Escape from Alcatraz was released. Starring Clint Eastwood as Frank Morris, it dramatized the escape plan in detail. The film closely followed the facts from FBI reports and Alan West's statements. It was a success and introduced millions of people to the story. Books and documentaries also examined the case, often highlighting the cleverness of the escape. Family claims. The Anglin family occasionally made statements over the years. Relatives claimed the brothers had sent Christmas cards after 1962, though handwriting analysis was never conclusive. In later decades, photographs surfaced that some said showed the brothers alive in South America. The FBI reviewed these claims, but found no verified evidence. The 2013 letter. In 2013, San Francisco police received a letter supposedly written by one of the escapees. The writer claimed to be one of the Anglin brothers, and said he wanted to negotiate for medical care. The letter was tested by the FBI, but handwriting and DNA results were inconclusive. Authorities treated it as unverified, and the case remained officially unresolved. U.S. Marshals Service. Since 1979, the U.S. Marshals Service has been responsible for the case. Their policy is clear. Until a fugitive is proven dead, the case remains open. As of today, Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin are still listed as wanted escapees. The marshals continue to receive tips and review claims, though none have been proven. Popular culture. The Alcatraz escape has become a permanent part of American crime history. Tourists visiting San Francisco almost always hear about the case. At the island's museum exhibits, the dummy heads, the vent covers, and the tools are displayed. Park rangers explain the escape to visitors daily, making it one of the highlights of the Alcatraz tour. Television specials, podcasts, and online videos keep retelling the story. The mix of fact and mystery makes it appealing. Unlike many other escapes, this one left behind artifacts that can still be seen. Public fascination, the escape is remembered not only for the men involved, but also for what it represented. Alcatraz was supposed to be the end of the line, the place no one could break free from. Yet 3 men managed to slip out, using nothing more than spoons, raincoats, and determination. For some, it is a story of ingenuity. For others, it is a chilling reminder of how dangerous criminals might have walked free. For historians, it is one of the most documented and debated prison escapes ever attempted. Why it lasts. Part of the fascination comes from the lack of a final answer. If the men drowned, no one can prove it. If they survived, no one can show where they went. This uncertainty allows the case to remain open-ended, giving it a lasting place in true crime history. Scientific studies of survival over the decades. Scientists and researchers have studied whether the 1962 escapees could have survived the Bay crossing. The key questions were about the tides, the temperature, and the raft. Water temperature, the water around Alcatraz, averages 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, an average person without protection can last only 30 to 45 minutes before hypothermia sets in. Strong swimmers might last longer, but exhaustion would come quickly. The raft and raincoat vests gave the men some protection, but not much. Tides and currents. The San Francisco Bay has powerful tides. On June 11, 1962, the outgoing tide was moving west toward the Golden Gate. If the men launched between 11 p.m. and midnight, as Alan West suggested, the current would have pushed them toward the ocean. Without strong paddling, they might have been swept out past the bridge. However, later studies showed survival was not impossible. In 2014, a team of Dutch scientists at Delft University used computer models to recreate the tide patterns of that night. Their research found that if the men launched between 11 p.m. and midnight, and if they paddled north, they could have reached Angel Island. After resting there, they might have been able to move to the Marin shoreline. Experiments and replicas. The television show Mythbusters tested the escape in 2003. They built a raft using raincoats, just like the prisoners. Their tests showed that the raft could float and could carry men across the bay, with favorable timing. They concluded the escape might have been survivable. National Geographic and other documentary teams have also recreated the conditions. Each time the results showed that, while the crossing was dangerous, it was possible. The raft design, though crude, worked. Official position. The FBI's conclusion in 1964 was that the men drowned. This was based on the harsh water conditions and the lack of confirmed evidence of survival. But the U.S. Marshals Service continues to list the case as open. Their position is that, until proof of death is found, the men remain fugitives. Debate scientists agree that the bay is dangerous. Many drownings have been recorded in its waters. But the fact that the raft floated, the life vests were functional, and the timing might have matched a favorable tide leaves the question open. More than 60 years later, the debate continues. Some believe the men died within minutes of launching. Others argue that with planning and luck, they could have made it to shore. The Alcatraz escape of June 11, 1962 remains one of the most famous prison breaks in history. 3 men, Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin, disappeared from what was called an escape-proof prison. They left behind dummy heads, holes carved through concrete, and a raft made of raincoats. The facts are clear. The men spent months preparing. They created tools from scraps, built a workshop in the walls, and practiced moving through the prison's hidden passages. On the night of the escape, they left their cells, climbed to the roof, and launched into the bay. What happened after that point is unknown. The FBI investigated for 17 years. Their conclusion was that the men drowned in the cold waters before reaching land. They based this on tides, water temperature, and the lack of verified sightings. In 1979, the Bureau closed its file. The U.S. Marshals Service, however, never declared the men dead. Their case remains open. Escapees are still listed as wanted. The Marshals' position is simple. Without proof of death, the search continues. Over the years, evidence has been debated. Items were found in the bay. Family members claimed contact. A letter surfaced decades later. None of it was confirmed. At the same time, scientific studies and experiments showed survival was possible under the right conditions. Alcatraz itself closed less than a year after the escape. Today it is a national park visited by millions. The story of the escape is told every day on tours. The dummy heads, the vent covers, and the photographs are displayed as reminders of that night. The legacy of the Alcatraz escape is not about whether the men lived or died. It is about how they challenged a system thought to be unbreakable. With patience and ingenuity, they proved that even the most secure prison had weaknesses. More than 60 years later, the question remains. Did Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers make it to freedom, or did they vanish in the waters of San Francisco Bay? Officially, no answer exists. The mystery endures, making the 1962 escape from Alcatraz one of the greatest unsolved stories in American crime history.